to Dying in Grace. This show is dedicated to educating our community about all issues that have to do with death and dying, end-of-life care, and living in grace. If we live a full life, then our dying process is not so difficult. You can watch the show later after you're seeing it air on TVSB. It's available on our website, dyingingrace.com. You can follow us at Twitter at Dying in Grace. And we also have a YouTube channel, Dying in Grace, so you can watch this show and share it with your friends. We really believe that if we get comfortable with talking about all aspects of death and dying, we'll shift our culture. So every week we will be bringing in a community expert who will offer us some wisdom, some education, and some insight about an aspect of death and dying. Tonight's guest is Jennifer Parks. She's both the general manager at McDermott-Crockett Mortuary and also a funeral celebrant. So welcome, Jenny. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, really happy to have you here. So the first question I think people want to know is, how did you become a funeral celebrant? How did you get into that as your profession?
Well, I think that this work really, the only requirement is a servant's heart. It's a service industry, it's a service to the community, and obviously a service to the departed and to their family. I started out as a doula in San Francisco and helped deliver babies, and then moved to Santa Barbara, and my best girlfriend's parents owned the mortuary and asked me to come work for them, and I said, absolutely not. There's no way. I'll cry every day. And then actually a baby came into the mortuary, and his family really needed somebody with some expertise and some background and tenderness in taking care of babies too. And so I offered to help. And then I fell in love, really, because there's nothing better than being able to, there's nothing we can do to help their grief, but we can certainly affect how they celebrate or remember their loved one. And there were a lot of special moments with that baby, and there were a lot of things that we were able to do that preserved that memory forever.
So let me just stop you, because you've said so many important things. First off, I love what you said about a servant's heart. And there's lots of ways to be of service to people in end-of-life care. This is a unique calling. Mm-hmm. There's lots of ways people can serve, and I think there's probably people out there going, yeah, but I couldn't do that.
Right.
And it sounds like you thought you couldn't do it either. And I also just want to call out that the doula, which most people know or associate primarily with bringing babies into the world,
right,
but there is now a movement for end-of-life doulas too, to help people leave the body. So it's kind of, we've started to integrate that. So your friends, parents invited you in, you were afraid you were going to cry every day. How was it for you when you did that first service for the baby? Did the servant's heart kick in? And
absolutely.
So how was that for you?
I think in going to work, when you help someone, everything, all of the misconceptions, all of the things that you thought you were going to do just kind of get put aside, because the most important thing is them. And so whatever I could do to help, I wanted to do, to help ease their burden just a little bit, you know. I remember Mama came in and she said, am I ever going to get out of my pajamas? And I said, not today, you know. And then they said, we just got the memorial prints back from the hospital and it looks like they've been done on Post-it notes. Can you do something? And so I was able to do impressions in clay and cast the baby's hand and did new impressions with ink, and you know, those are things that they'll treasure forever. A year later, I was asked to speak at his funeral because they actually didn't do anything until a year later, and so and you know, you become it's such an intimate process. You know, and I feel just so privileged to be invited in to their love story. And so whatever feeling I had of inadequacy or not, you know, overwhelming, it's not my grief to carry, but it's certainly, you have this incredible empathy.
You know, I have a teacher, and one of the things he always said is the willingness to do provides the ability to do.
Absolutely.
And that's what I hear in this beautiful story. Interesting that a child was your first entree into this funeral celebration. Now, McDermott-Crockett itself as a mortuary has a unique history in Santa Barbara. So maybe you can tell people the address and a little bit about the building for people who may never have seen it or driven by and said, what is that, but don't know what it looks like.
Well, we've been a mortuary since 1906, so a long time in this community. And they moved, you know, a couple of times before the 20s, and then we're in the Colonial building that's on the corner of Pedregosa and State for 70 years. In 2005, we moved from that building to a little historic chapel on Chapala Street. So we're at 2020 Chapala, which is at Mission. And that little chapel has an interesting history in town too. It's been moved 3 times. It was the first St. Mark's Episcopal Church in town, and they call it the little chapel that got down to business. So it's got all of the original architecture inside. It's all redwood. It's beautiful. It's a very charming little space that's perfect for us.
Yes, having been in there, I think there's something soothing about the environment. I mean, I've been there I've been there for services as well, but I mean, there's something really soothing about walking in there, which is not the same feeling I've had going into other funeral homes, as you'd call them. So tell me a little bit about funeral planning and what people's options are and what they should be thinking about now when they don't want to think about death at all.
Well, I always say that planning your own funeral is the ultimate gift of love. I mean, really, most people don't want to talk about it. My dad always says the closer you get to it, the less you really want to talk about it. But what people don't realize is there's a lot of chaos when someone dies, and the grief is overwhelming, and it's hard to make good decisions when you haven't talked about it at all. So there are a lot of misconceptions, like people will say, well, if I talk about it, it invites it in. Like if you talk about death, you're going to die. Well, we know intellectually that's not true, but it's very difficult to explain to people. Just tell your kids. Tell your kids what you want. You know, do you want a party at the beach? Do you want a traditional service? Is religion important? Is being in the church important? Is burial in the ground important? Do you want to be cremated? What's going to happen with your ashes? And, you know, thinking about those things in advance, even just telling someone or writing them down if you don't want to talk about it, is really a gift. You know, people can go as far as planning their own funeral, planning what they want done, the kind of celebration they want, the type of music they want played, the readings they want done. But ultimately, it's really just having the conversation. And it's not a difficult conversation to have if you approach it from a perspective of love. You know, we've taken care of our kids from birth until they leave our nest, right? I mean, this is just another way to take care of your people.
You know, that's such a beautiful message for people, that talking about death is another act of loving, because I really think people think about talking about death is going to frighten people. It's and I really appreciate what you're saying about the almost the mental mythology or the superstition. You know, if I talk about it, it's going to bring it here. So we don't want, you know, it's that all the stories we tell ourselves so we don't have to tell ourselves the truth, that you know, we live with death every day. You know, whether we know it or not, it's right here in the room with us. And sometimes we get to plan ahead, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes there's a sudden death, and like you said, there's all kinds of chaos that happens. So what are some, let's say somebody says, okay, I want to do some planning. I want to do some planning. I'm not sure I'm ready to write my obituary or pick that. But what would be some first steps for people to do? Would they if they contacted you as a funeral celebrant, what does that mean, and how would you guide them through the process? Like, they're healthy, they're inspired, they want to go, okay, gift of love. Let me do this.
Well, we would either come to the house or they could come into the mortuary, either way. We would sit with them and go over all of the important stuff, the vital information for the death certificate. We can put that down on paper. You know, your mother's maiden name, where she was born. Those are things that are required for the death certificate. So sometimes the kids don't know that information. And then we would talk about, you know, how do you want to be remembered? What is important to you? We want to share your life with everybody who would come to this celebration. So that would be your boss, your niece, anybody who, you know, your kids' friends. And so how do we illustrate what's important to you? What is your ethical will? What do you want to leave behind? And, you know, for me, I always said I wanted to be cremated, and I want glitter in my cremains because I want to be the confetti at the party. So I want a big, huge party, dance party, everybody laughing, having a good time, and remembering me, you know, remembering all the things that make me uniquely me. And we all have people in our lives, you know, your mom, your dad, your whoever, who, you know, who made a wonderful paella. You know, why not have a celebration that we make paella or we serve paella? Or, you know, Thanksgiving was their very favorite holiday. Well, let's have Thanksgiving. You know, it doesn't follow, there aren't any rules in terms of how you can be celebrated. It can be completely elaborate and outlandish, or it could be very simple and quiet.
So given that, what would you say is one of the most memorable or one of the most unique things that a family wanted that you were able to execute at your place so they could have a celebration? What are some that stand out for you?
Well, one of my very favorites was Mr. Ogle, who was a World War II veteran who loved Coors beer a lot. So much so that he always had a keg on his porch, and he had this enclosed porch with a yellow tablecloth on the table. He would yell at Fox News, and anybody who came by was invited in to have a beer. So we transformed our chapel into Johnny's patio, and we served Coors beer, and everybody got one of his beer glasses. And the other thing that he did was he always had candy in a U-Bahn coffee cup, U-Bahn coffee
the container,
in his car. So he would give it to the girls at the bank, or he would give it to kids on the street. And so we had U-Bahn coffee containers filled with candy and Cheetos, because that was his favorite. And then we had a barbecue. So his grandkids celebrated him, and his wife of 70 plus years was there, and we told his love story.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I mean, I think that you know, there are people that are religious, and it's important to them to have those church ceremonies and those funerals. I mean, depending on where religion is in your life and all those things. And you will also help people execute all of that as well. So if I wanted to have my funeral at Trinity Episcopal or wherever, you make all those arrangements for me. And if I had a plot, you'd help me or my family do all of that. Right?
We take care of all of the details from the beginning to the end. The goal really is to, you know, I feel like people come into our mortuary with their arms full of golf balls and eggs. You know, it's really our job to pull all of those out of their arms and take care of all of the details. We're a traditional full-service mortuary, so we do traditional burials, you know, and religion and ritual is very comforting to people. That's what we know. That's what Grandma did. That's what Aunt Betty had done. That's what we know, and that's comforting. But not everybody is connected to a church or connected to a religion, especially here in California, where most of us are transplants. So we take our friends' ideas and our family's ideas of what's important, and we make those our own. So really, our job is to listen first and really connect with the person who is deceased and what their relationship is with their family. And for each person, that's different.
So, I think that your profession is misunderstood. You mentioned earlier, there's a lot of misconceptions. So what are the things that people have misconceptions about that you'd like to dispel? Like, what would you like people to really understand about your role and funeral directors in general?
I think that, how people feel about hospice volunteers, that they just have the biggest hearts. Funeral directors are equal, if not greater. Our job, our sole job, is to ease your burden. And I feel like people have an idea that funeral homes are just greedy, they want to, make money, and certainly that's true for some of them, but I can only speak for us. And for us, it is, of course, a service business, so it is a business as well, but what we do is really an enormous service to people. And I think that if people could rely more on the funeral director to execute the details, you don't need to worry about the details. We'll take care of all of that for you. And if our job is done correctly, we'll have listened really well, and we'll have created something that you'll never forget, and will ease the grief journey just a little bit. We do have, I believe we have that responsibility and that obligation to our families to make the service that we provide the most exquisite and something that will be memorable and be talked about. Remember Aunt Sally's funeral? It was amazing. We laughed, we sang, we told stories, we had her pie, we put her recipes out for everybody to,
So it's a joyful thing. With that view, as someone who was a child when my father died, and that was the first funeral I ever attended, and I had no preparation for what that was about, I'm grateful that I went. I think it was important for me to go. I think there were people that were advising my mother to not have me go. That was many years ago. What do you think, or what have you observed about children being present at either a traditional funeral or a celebration of life? What do you have a view or an observation about how that impacts grief or families or whatever?
I think it's enormously important to involve kids because they feel so out of control, and usually everything is kind of kept on the hush-hush, or not a lot of details are talked about, or they're not involved, and so they feel scared. It makes them even more scared. So the more you can involve kids, and I say listen to them, if they absolutely don't want to go up to an open casket and see grandma, don't make them, but if they could write grandma a letter and tell her how much they loved her, and we can tuck that into her pocket and send that with her, that gives them some measure of control. I've had kids that have, in different cultures, it's just done differently. So there are kids who are present for a 3-day visitation, and they're very, very comfortable with it. I think it's important to allow kids to see the reality of death, because I don't think that it's real until you go through this process of mourning someone, however that mourning is done. And so if they draw a picture, if they make a flower arrangement and we could tuck it in with them, I send things along with people all the time.
Well, the thing I really appreciate, I think it's an underlying theme here, is the ability to really listen, to make space and listen. And I know sometimes I've watched families, and certainly working with hospice, where people are not listening to one another, or there's tension. But I think in particular, I really appreciate the creativity that children can bring, and the levity that children can bring, in that innocence. And as we're trying to normalize and reintegrate death as it used to be when we were an agricultural society, kids saw death all the time. It was not a big deal. So that's really beautiful. Talking about the services that McDermott-Crockett not only offers to people during the immediate death, but you have done some very unique things for your clients to help them in the grieving process. I'm wondering if you could just share with our audience a couple examples of what you do, not only for your clients, but for the community at large, because I think it's important.
It's important for me to, once the funeral is done, to not lose the relationship. The relationship that we create with someone is so intimate. I mean, they're allowing us into this love story that is theirs, and we're strangers. So I don't want to be a stranger. And so one of the things we do, which I love very much, is our Valentine's dinner. I created a few years ago a dinner called A Heart Full of Memories, that just, for anyone who wants to come who has lost their sweetheart in the last year. So anybody we have taken care of in the last year that lost their husband, wife, sweetheart, whoever, is invited to dinner with me and my staff at a really nice restaurant, and we just celebrate them. We have little tokens that that illustrate their relationship with their loved one that's passed, and it's a day that's very lonely for some people. And so I don't want them to be alone. I want them to have somebody, at least for that first year.
And I think especially in the grieving process, my own experience is that people are crowd around you right in the first couple of months, and then 8 weeks later they're into their own lives, and meanwhile you're experiencing your first Valentine's Day, your first anniversary, your first whatever, and who do you go to and who really understands? So that's a very beautiful thing. And then you created a program to help people move on with Life Steps?
Yeah, so we created a program called Life Steps, which is a series of 4 classes that are open to the community that teach people real life skills. Like, you know, some people are living alone for the first time in their whole lives. You know, they may have been married 50 years, and all of a sudden they find themselves in a house alone. And so we do a home and personal safety, we do cooking for one, and then what I've seen a lot is people have found themselves not knowing who they are.
Right.
You know, they were
that role for so long.
They were somebody's wife, they were somebody's caregiver, they were somebody's mom, whatever that is, you know. So we did a class called Rejuvenation and Reinvention. So those are just kind of some ideas. I always am looking for different ideas, what people want, what do they want to see, traveling alone, and you know, doing a lot of things the first time. So just giving people some idea of what to do next, you know.
So the beauty of what you are demonstrating, that I think is so important, is it's an ongoing relationship. Yeah. It's not like we're just gonna bury your loved one and
say goodbye
and take, you know, pay the bill goodbye next. Yeah, I think that's really important. So what has this work taught you about how to be with people that are grieving? Well,
interestingly enough, I was actually diagnosed with a pretty significant illness about a year ago. I went into the hospital, was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis, and they found that was due to what's called a thymoma. And the thymoma is less than 1 in a million cancer. So I had my own pretty quick awakening with, you know, I thought I was present before, really. I really was paying attention. I was trying, raising a family and working and all of those things and doing what was important. And then when you're faced with your own mortality, you definitely take a step back and really, although I knew I wasn't going to die, I knew it wasn't my time yet.
And how did you know?
I don't know. I just knew that I wasn't done here.
Clearly not. There's a lot more for you to do, Jenny.
I have 3 beautiful kids and, you know, an amazing husband who's taken incredible care of me. My sister, who is a saint, honestly, because I know for a fact that I would not take as good a care of her as she has of me. But I always say that love cured me. You know, and I'm still working on a bit of collateral damage, but I'm still trying to get back to 100%. But understanding, I mean, really, we're all just human. And what do you want when when you walk through the door to someone's establishment, whatever it may be, whether it's the cable company or, you know, the grocery store, you just want to be heard and acknowledged. And people don't need really anything except for us to listen and then to take care of what the details are. And we'll take care of the details. They don't have to worry about any of that. They just have to be.
So the thing that I think is so unique about, I mean, I certainly wish every business wanted to hear my whole story about what it means to have cable or not,
right.
You know, in that moment. But I loved how you framed that you're embracing someone's love story, and you're there to hear it and not take it away or damage it. And I think that's, if people can understand that also that dying is not the end of the love story.
No.
And I think that's what your Valentine, that is not the end, it's the end of an aspect of it, but
Right.
there's other things that come
The
forward.
relationship never goes away.
Exactly right, exactly right. So with your, you know, with this last minute or so, what message, if you could have our viewers understand anything about this final process of the body, let's say, what is it you want people to know?
Well, talk to your people. Tell them what you want. There are so many things that we can do, that we can help you. We're the experts. If you want to bathe grandma at home and dress her and do her hair and do her makeup at home, let us help you do that. If you want to, you know, if you don't want to do that at all and you just can't do that, then you don't have to do that either. But rely on us to be the experts that we are. Funeral and death care is what we do, it's what we love, and we're passionate about it.
Well, thank you, Jenny Parks. And I'd like to thank my crew. I'd like to thank TVSB for allowing us to produce this program. Thanks to my team, Elliot, Mike, and Suzanne, for being there for us.